After the divorce, I finally tasted the sweetness of freedom on my journey around the world, while she, Vivian, drifted through life with vacant eyes, her hair turning white. She had thrown me away for the ghost of a first love lodged in her heart. I no longer wanted her either. Vivian left me for Adrian, the man she'd adored in her youth. And today, word spread that Adrian's marriage was over, he was back in Los Angeles. I was left standing in the middle of a torrential downpour. I bought a loaf of bread from a vending machine, borrowed an old umbrella from a street cleaner, and booked the next available flight. The world was wide, and I wanted to see it. I wanted to find a place where there was no Vivian, and no Adrian. The rain came without warning, hammering down so fast it turned the sky black in an instant. I scrambled under the nearest overhang, dripping, breathless. The downpour roared around me, relentless and loud as gunfire. An hour earlier, Vivian had called, asking me to pick her up. But she still hadn't shown. The storm knocked out the signal, my calls to her went nowhere. I thought about leaving, but what if she arrived and couldn't find me? So I stayed. One by one, people around me were whisked away. Partners, friends, family, each arrived with an umbrella tilted carefully over the woman they came for, shielding her from the rain. I could picture Vivian being sheltered that way, Adrian's arm around her, his head bent toward hers. Adrian, the man she'd once loved but never had, for reasons I never learned in full. His marriage, from what I'd heard, had been unhappy. Vivian often lay awake at night, sighing, troubled. And today was the day Adrian was finally free, returning to Los Angeles. That morning, she had stepped out of the shower, slipped into a new dress, and tied a silk scarf with pale cloud patterns at her throat. I'd taken care of her needs for years, but I hadn't bought that scarf. 2 hours passed. The rain still pounded, the market's concrete floor slick beneath my shoes. Someone advised me to leave before the rising water stranded me overnight. I caught the concern in their eyes, and for some reason, I felt calm. I smiled at a passing street cleaner. In exchange for the fresh seafood I'd just bought, she handed me her battered old umbrella. It was worn, but solid, and it kept the water off my head. More dependable, I thought, than a lover who never came. I waded through the flooded market street and hailed the first cab I saw. At the airport, I realized I had nowhere to go. My grandmother, Eleanor, was my only living family, but if I showed up at her door, she'd know something was wrong. So I did the simplest thing, I bought a ticket for the soonest flight out. Destination didn't matter, only that it was far from Vivian, and far from Adrian. 3 years of marriage, and Adrian had seeped into my life like air, silent, invisible, yet everywhere. I couldn't stand it any longer. Just before boarding, my phone lit up. Vivian. I hesitated, then let it ring until it stopped. When it did, I added her number to my block list. At 9 o'clock, Vivian's car pulled into the driveway. Only the housekeeper came out to meet her. "Where's Ethan?" she asked, pausing with one hand on the car door. "Mr. Caldwell hasn't returned yet," the housekeeper replied. Vivian froze for a beat. Then she remembered, earlier that evening, on a whim, she'd decided to stop by the market for seafood. She'd called Ethan, asking him to meet her so they could head home together. But Adrian had a minor accident. She'd rushed him to the hospital, and the thought of Ethan waiting had slipped clean from her mind. Glancing out at the sheets of rain, a small pang of guilt flickered through her. Would Ethan be upset? The question barely formed before she shook her head, smiling faintly. She'd never known a man gentler, more patient than him. He wouldn't get angry over something so trivial. And besides, it was only rain. Ethan was a grown man, a little storm wouldn't keep him from getting home. "You've been caught in the rain, ma'am," the housekeeper said softly. "You should take a hot bath." Vivian nodded. "If Ethan comes back, tell him I'm upstairs." She ran a bath, steam curling against the mirrors, yet even with the heat soaking into her skin, a restless unease kept tugging at her thoughts. By the time she stepped out, her nose felt congested. She went to fetch cold medicine, only to realize the first aid kit was missing. It was nearly 10. No sign of Ethan. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the night seemed even darker. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. The ring droned on and on until the call dropped to voicemail. Her brow furrowed. That had never happened before. Ethan never ignored her calls. Maybe the storm had snarled traffic. Maybe there'd been some minor mishap on the road. Her chest tightened without warning. She dialed again. This time, his phone went straight to voicemail, powered off. Her frown deepened. Her expression hardened. Still, she called a third time. Again, nothing but the flat, final click of a dead line. Vivian stood there for a long while, the phone warm in her hand, the silence pressing in. Vivian let out a sudden, brittle laugh, so much for her claim that she had never met a man gentler, more tolerant than Ethan. She could take that line back now. By the time my plane touched down in a city I'd never set foot in, it was already deep into the night. The moment my phone signal returned, a flood of notifications poured in. Among them were several texts from an unfamiliar number. "Hello, Ethan. This is Adrian. I heard you and Vivian had an argument because of me, and you still haven't come home. I'm worried, and I'm sorry. I think I should explain my relationship with Vivian. Yes, we were in love once, but that was in the past. We're not what you think we are. I hate that I've caused distance between you. That's not what I wanted. Nobody wants Vivian to be happy more than I do. Ethan, if you get this, could you call her? Or at least let us know you're safe." It was absurd. If he'd truly been concerned for my safety, there were a dozen ways to find me. With Vivian's family background, tracking me down would be effortless. But after I walked out of that house, the first person to reach for me wasn't the police, it was Adrian. I hated it, the way even the smallest ripple in my life reached him almost instantly. I didn't reply. But Adrian was persistent. He called. I answered. Silence. Then, after a pause, came a low chuckle, smooth, deliberate. "You're not as good as Vivian makes you out to be, are you?" he said at last. "You've got quite the tolerance. 3 years before you finally snapped." "Ethan." His voice sharpened as he spoke my name. "Since you're willing to step aside, I'll make sure Vivian gives you more of the assets." I laughed quietly. "Mr. Whitmore, you've been through a divorce, fought the hard fights. I'm sure you know the ropes. I'll leave it in your capable hands. If the settlement's generous, I'll even buy you a coffee." I hung up before he could answer, blocked the number, and set my phone to reject all calls from unknown numbers. On the third day after Ethan left, Vivian called Eleanor, his grandmother, who lived nearly 1,000 miles away in the quiet little town of Williford. After the usual pleasantries, Vivian ventured, "Ethan was just saying a few days ago that he wanted to come see you." "No need, dear. I'm doing just fine." "That's such a long trip, don't have him wear himself out," Eleanor replied warmly. Vivian stood on the wide terrace, the phone pressed to her ear, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. She could almost feel her own heart sinking with the fading light. She knew Eleanor was the only family Ethan had left. It seemed obvious to her that he must have gone back there, nursing some petty grudge against her. But he hadn't. So where had Ethan been these last few days? She turned and caught sight of his jacket hanging neatly on the coat rack. The living room was spotless, except for a single tie draped across the sofa. Maybe he'd left in a hurry, too rushed to pack properly. She picked up the tie, a muted color, embroidered with a delicate rose motif. Vivian stared at it for a moment, lost in thought. Many of Ethan's clothes carried that same design. Because her own name, Vivian, contained the character for Rose. The second ring of Adrian's call pulled her back to the present. "Vivian, I just passed your garden," his voice came through clear. "The roses are all withered. Have the gardener clear them out, they look unsightly." "No." It was the first time she'd ever refused him outright. Adrian paused, caught off guard. "Are you upset, Vivian?" "Yes, you must be attached to them. After all, Ethan planted them for you," he said, his voice tinged with melancholy. Vivian's heart softened. "That's not what I meant, Adrian." "Still no word from Ethan?" "No. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have come back. Adrian's sigh was quiet, almost regretful. For some reason, his voice only made her restless. Ethan was rarely like this, rarely the type to sulk or wallow. The only time she'd seen him truly down was in their first year of marriage, when she'd missed his birthday. He'd been alone that night, drinking in silence. She'd been in Atlanta, rushing to Adrian's side after his wife's brothers had beaten him over a bitter divorce dispute. Adrian had been hurt, and she'd been deeply worried, so much so that she hadn't noticed the quiet hurt she'd left in her own home. Now, an inexplicable irritation pricked at her. 3 years of marriage, and she had never realized Ethan could be this stubborn. She sat down on the edge of the bed. After a long pause, Vivian finally decided to call Ethan's closest friend. The man sounded surprised. No, he hadn't heard from Ethan. No calls, no visits. Vivian hung up, her hands trembling so badly she nearly knocked over the half-full glass of water on the table. She caught it at the last moment, then grabbed a tissue to wipe away the drops. Ethan was meticulous about cleanliness. When he was home, every corner of the house was spotless, the air crisp and scentless. Her phone rang again, an unfamiliar landline number. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail. This time, she answered instantly. Hello. Her voice quivered. It's me, Ethan. For reasons she couldn't name, the sound of his voice jolted her, flooding her chest with a rush of emotion. Ethan, you're not a child, she burst out. Running away from home at your age, how childish is that? Is this what a man like you should be doing? Do you even realize the damage this will cause to the Lancaster family if word gets out? I'm sorry. She gripped the phone tightly, exhaling, feeling the crushing weight in her chest lift, if only slightly. Good. If you know you're wrong, then come home, she said, her tone softening. Vivian, I called for another reason. What reason? I sent you something in the mail. By now, you should have received it. What could you possibly need to mail? You could just bring it with you when you come back. His voice stayed steady, calm, too calm. I'm not coming back. Just make sure you sign for the package. If you read it and have no objections, sign it. I'll call you again in 2 days. This phone belongs to someone else. Once I hang up, don't bother calling it back. What are you talking about? The fragile relief she just felt vanished, replaced by a tight knot in her chest. Vivian, after 3 years of marriage, I'm not happy. I'm tired. So let's get a divorce. Vivian fell silent. Ethan said nothing either, as if politely waiting for her response. Where are you right now? That doesn't matter. She stared out into the stillness of the evening. What is this, some kind of performance? On the other end, Ethan didn't answer. She thought she heard him chuckle softly before he hung up. Her instinct was immediate, she dialed the number back. A woman's voice answered. A stranger. Vivian murmured an apology and ended the call. Outside, dusk deepened into night. She sat motionless in the thickening shadows. 3 years of marriage, and Ethan had been like a cup of warm water, never cold, never boiling, always the same. He'd once had a promising business. But when her work became too demanding, he'd set it aside without complaint, devoting himself entirely to her. He never lost his temper. Never raised his voice. Always spoke with a gentle, approachable ease. Everyone liked him, praised him, admired him. So much so that Vivian had nearly forgotten. Theirs had begun as a business arrangement. And for a man with nothing more than a modest little company to marry the heir to the Lancaster family, how likely was it that he was truly as tolerant, harmless, and guileless as he appeared? Vivian turned toward her vanity and set down the tie she'd been holding so tightly. In the mirror, she caught sight of herself, brows drawn, eyes dark with anger. She was not a woman who often wore her emotions plainly, yet this small disruption had unsteadied her more than she cared to admit. In moments, she smoothed her face back to its usual calm, unreadable mask. She stepped out of the master bedroom and went downstairs. Adrian called to her from the living room. She answered lightly, without pausing, and told the housekeeper to bring her the packages delivered that day. From the stack, she picked out the envelope sent by Ethan, slid it open, and slid out the papers. Without a flicker of expression, she tore the divorce agreement into pieces and dropped them into the trash. Vivian. Adrian was on his feet at once, stepping forward to gently take her arm, his voice coaxing. Don't be upset. Maybe Ethan's just acting on impulse. He's always been reasonable. If I hadn't come back, if I hadn't caused you this trouble, he wouldn't be sulking like this. Vivian's voice was cool. This has nothing to do with you. He's being childish. A grown man, walking out over a petty argument. And if he's childish, isn't it because you've let him be? Adrian forced a faint smile. People are always telling me how devoted you two are. Before he could finish, Vivian's eyes shone faintly red. She gave a short, cold laugh. You may not know why others think I married him, but you know why I did. Adrian stared at her, silent. Vivian eased her arm from his grasp. I need to go out. Do you want to head home or stay here? I'll wait here. With things like this between you and Ethan, I'm worried about you. Vivian nodded, instructing the housekeeper to prepare a room for him, then told the driver to bring the car around. Without another word, she walked out. Adrian watched her go. His gaze shifted to the trash can and the shreds of the divorce agreement. Pressing his lips together, he lowered himself slowly into the sofa. Why had Vivian torn it up? She didn't look like a woman with any real intention of divorcing Ethan. I knew the day I left, if the Lancaster family's heiress wanted to find someone, she could. Easily. The only question was whether she felt like it. So when I saw Vivian standing outside the hotel, I wasn't surprised. Early autumn, and she wore a light camel trench, sunglasses shielding her eyes. She was stunning, slender, elegant, the kind of beauty that drew stares without trying. Next to her, I was painfully ordinary. A plain shirt and slacks. Hair uncombed. Cheap sneakers. A grocery bag from the corner market dangling at my side. Once, early in our marriage, the difference between us had made me feel ashamed. But now? I'd made my peace with it. Vivian and I had been a mistake from the start. She removed her sunglasses, her face unreadable. I set the grocery bag down. Vivian glanced at her watch, her voice as cool as ever. Go pack your things. 30 minutes should be enough. Did you sign the papers? I asked, holding out my hand. Give me the divorce agreement, and I'll go back with you to finalize it. Her eyes, cold, still, but somehow deeper than before, didn't give anything away. Now isn't the right time to announce our divorce. Then let's keep it private. We can file quietly, without going public. Ethan, you know the company's anniversary gala is next week. You'll need to be there with me. The corner of her mouth curved into a smile, edged with something that wasn't quite amusement. You've got impeccable timing. But you should know by now, I'm not someone who can be maneuvered at will. I said nothing, just held her gaze. We had once been closer than anyone. I'd always believed it was men who could separate sex from love. I'd been wrong. Vivian could, too. Those nights, when she curled into me and called me her husband, I had thought, at least then, maybe there was some small trace of real feeling. But that storm, rainless on my skin, drowning in my chest, had washed away the illusion. Vivian would never understand. She had never loved me. If you agree to the divorce, I'll be there for the anniversary next week, I said evenly. Anything the company needs from me, I'll cooperate. I even smiled at her, as I used to. Vivian, this costs you nothing. Her eyes stayed on me for a long moment before she finally nodded. Fine. After the gala, we'll go to court. I didn't return with Vivian. It wasn't until the eve of the company's anniversary gala that I boarded a flight back to Los Angeles. To avoid sparking unnecessary gossip from the press, I rode in her car straight from the airport to the house. When I stepped out, Adrian greeted me as though he were the host. "Ethan, you're finally back." He strode toward me, grasping my hand with a show of sentiment. I looked at him evenly. The Whitmore family might not rival the Lancasters, but they were still leagues above a man like me. Adrian's suit was perfectly tailored, expensive without needing a label to prove it. His presence fit far more naturally beside Vivian's. I said nothing, simply sliding my hand free. There was a ring on Adrian's middle finger. My own hand was bare, my wedding band long gone, my palm rough with a thin layer of callus. When I first learned of Adrian, I used to compare myself to him in secret. Now, no matter how polished or handsome he appeared, I felt nothing. I didn't look at him again, nor did I respond. I shifted my bag, walked past him, and kept going. For a moment, he seemed thrown off balance. A housekeeper stepped forward. "Sir, allow me to take that for you." I smiled politely and declined. "No, thank you." The housekeeper hesitated, glancing toward Vivian. "Let him be," she said, withdrawing her gaze and heading upstairs. But I didn't follow her. Instead, I turned toward the guest room on the first floor, the one reserved for visitors. "Ethan." Her voice cracked like a whip. Vivian was angry now, perhaps because I'd chosen, in front of the staff, to make both her and Adrian uncomfortable. I didn't answer. I had no interest in exchanging words with her. All I wanted was to get through the gala without incident, so our marriage could end as soon as possible. When we walked into the ballroom hand in hand, the evening was in full swing. She was breathtaking. I played the part of the attentive husband with practiced ease. While mingling, she kept her fingers wrapped around mine, glancing up at me with a look of tenderness. I smiled back. Once, that smile had been genuine, lit from within. Now, it was a mask. I despised the man I was in that moment almost as much as I despised her. I just wanted it all to be over. But near the end of the evening, a plate of sashimi was set in front of her. The faint tang of raw fish reached her nose, and she bolted upright, rushing to the restroom. The sound of her retching carried even over the music. When she emerged, her face pale, she swayed on her feet. I caught her before she fell and took her straight to the hospital. The doctor ran a full panel of tests. At last, he came back holding the results, smiling broadly. "Congratulations," he said to me. "Your wife is pregnant." Vivian was wheeled back into her room. "Honey." Her voice was soft, almost fragile as she lay against the white hospital pillows. For a moment, I felt unmoored. Vivian was rarely this gentle. In 3 years of marriage, moments like this had been rare, so rare I could count them on one hand. She hadn't seen Adrian often during those years, but every time she did, she softened into that small, delicate version of herself she seemed to reserve for him alone. Her tenderness for Adrian had always been because he was the man she wanted. Her tenderness toward me, in the past, it was never because of me. And now? Perhaps only because she was carrying a child. She took my hand, her smile gentle at the edges. "I've already sent for Eleanor. She's overjoyed," she cried when I told her on the phone. I sat there, blinking back sudden heat in my eyes. 3 years married, and there had been no children. Eleanor had worried constantly. She knew the gap between our family and the Lancasters was wide, and in her mind, a child might bridge it. But Eleanor had never known the real reason. Vivian had been clear from the start, she didn't want children yet. She wanted to enjoy a few more years of freedom, just the two of us. She'd been meticulous about birth control. So why was she so happy now? When the doctor left, the room grew quiet. "Don't bring up divorce again," she said softly. "Ethan, stay with me and the baby. We'll make it work, just the three of us." I lifted my head to meet her eyes. "Vivian, we're still getting a divorce." Her lips pressed into a thin line. The warmth drained from her expression, replaced by a slow, frosted edge. "Then you can tell Eleanor yourself," she said. "Tell her you're abandoning your wife and your child. Tell her, if you can stomach it, that you're willing to break her heart at her age." Vivian was certain I wouldn't dare. That I'd stay in the marriage out of loyalty to Eleanor, swallowing whatever bitterness came with it. But she forgot, Eleanor was never the kind of woman who clung to convention. When she was young, she had defied her parents, broken off an engagement, run away alone to live with distant relatives. When her husband fell into addiction, she had walked out, divorced him, and taken her only daughter with her. Yes, she was old now, frail-looking, kind-faced, content to sit quietly on the porch, but I knew if she learned the truth about Vivian and me, she would stand behind me, no matter what I chose. Vivian cleared her schedule entirely, dedicating herself to the pregnancy. The story of her collapsing at the gala and the hospital announcing her pregnancy had already spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed outside the hospital, a wall of cameras and microphones. On the day she was discharged, the scene was nothing short of a spectacle. People said I was lucky. With my background, to marry the heir to the Lancaster fortune, the one who ran the family empire, was nothing short of a miracle. And now Vivian was pregnant. If the child was born healthy, even if we divorced one day, I'd walk away with more than I could ever spend. No one knew the truth. That none of this was what I wanted. I would trade every dollar, every promise of security, if it meant my wife's heart was mine alone. "Adrian's left Los Angeles," Vivian said as we drove. She tightened her grip on my hand. "I told you from the start, there was never romance between us. We grew up together. When we were kids, he took a blow to the head to protect me, still has the scar. When I was little, I looked up to him. Now, I only see him as an older brother. Ethan, you really shouldn't hold on to something so small. But since it matters to you, I'll be more mindful from now on. No private meetings with Adrian. No contact of any kind." She wrapped her arm through mine. "Let's leave it there. The baby's coming. Our future, just the three of us, we can make it good, can't we?" And in that moment, I almost believed her. After all, Vivian was the woman I loved. After all, she was carrying my child. Whatever else was true, that was my blood. For days, I'd wrestled with myself, doubt, hope, hesitation. Maybe her pregnancy was a sign, a chance for us. But before I could decide, Adrian found a way to reach me. "Do you know why Vivian's pregnant?" he asked. "Because I was going to divorce her. You might think that if I were serious about leaving, Vivian would be even more careful with birth control." He gave a sudden laugh, sharp, hollow, edged with something bitter. "Ethan, an accident years ago left me unable to have children. If not for that, why do you think Vivian agreed to marry you in the first place? So now you understand where your child really came from. To be precise, you're just the means we used to have one." I sat there, feeling a cold seep into my bones, spreading upward until it filled me entirely. And yet, I wasn't crushed. Instead, there was a strange, almost weightless sense of release. In that moment, I knew. Every emotion I'd ever held for Vivian, every knot, every wound, was gone. So what if I did the opposite? I asked. What if, just to spite you, I refused to give you what you want and stayed married to her? "You're not that man," Adrian said without hesitation. "You seem gentle, patient, endlessly tolerant. But your eyes, they don't suffer a single grain of sand." I found myself smiling. Adrian, thank you for telling me. Ethan, don't hate me. I love her too much. And love, real love, is always selfish. Always blind. I didn't answer. I ended the call, rose from my seat, and walked to the window. At dusk, the garden was nearly stripped bare. The roses, planted by my own hands in the year Vivian and I married, were all but gone. A breeze passed, and the last bloom on the branch loosened and dropped into the soil. The flowers were gone. The dream, too, had finally ended. The night Vivian and I shared our last dinner together, I wore a light gray suit, formal, precise. It must have felt familiar to her. She stared for a moment before placing it. I'd worn something almost identical the first time we met. Back then, she had just lost her fight against the family's will. Adrian, in a storm of grief, had fled to Atlanta to marry someone else. She'd met me reluctantly, already looking for an excuse to be rid of me. The first sharp, cutting words had just left her lips, then she looked into my eyes and stopped. Vivian had never seen a man look so broken. For a heartbeat, it made her feel guilty. I'm sorry, I told her quietly. I didn't realize you were forced to meet me. I'll go back and tell your father to call off the engagement. There was a flush of embarrassment in my face, but no anger. No retaliation. Even in apology, my tone stayed gentle. She watched me stand, only to knock over my coffee by accident. The dark stain spread over my trousers. I bent to dab it away, my fingers long and pale, each one shaped like a piece of carved ivory. And, somehow, her heart moved. She thought of the love she could never have. She thought of Adrian, already married. And she felt herself sink into a strange, reckless surrender. Your name is Ethan, isn't it? She asked. I nodded. Yes. Do you like me? I froze, then gave the smallest nod. She saw the red bloom across my ears. For some reason, it made her smile. Ethan, she said, let's get married. My eyes went wide. But you just. She leaned back in her chair, her smile curving into something teasing, her gaze locked on mine. She had always been the most beautiful girl in the room, and she knew it. As an adult, her beauty had ripened into something lush and dangerous, sensual without effort. Her eyes glimmered with mischief as she lifted one brow and laughed softly, her voice a low ripple of allure. I'm just teasing you, Ethan. And don't you dare run to your grandmother with this. I shook my head quickly. No, I'd never tattle. My ears burned hotter. I couldn't look at her again. The date ended and I took her home. When she stepped out of the car that day, she caught his hand. 3 months later, they were engaged. 7 months after that, they were married. Now, 3 years into their marriage, she was carrying what the world would call the fruit of their love. Vivian felt something complicated moving through her chest. The child had arrived exactly on schedule, just as she had planned. She was supposed to feel joy. And yet, the joy was tangled with something else. Lately, she couldn't stop wondering. Would it be a boy or a girl? Of course, a boy would be ideal. But if it was a girl, and she looked like Ethan, that might be nice, too. Why was she wishing the child would look like Ethan? Her original plan had been to keep the baby and discard the father. One day, this child would call Adrian Dad. Now, Vivian sensed, vaguely but unmistakably, that something was slipping out of her control. And the strangest part was, she didn't want to stop it. Some part of her wanted to let it keep unraveling. That night, dinner was cooked by Ethan himself. She hadn't been nauseated. Her spirits were high. She even joined him in tasting a little of the fruit wine he'd brewed years ago. With the warmth of alcohol in her cheeks, she thought Ethan looked particularly handsome, like a piece of polished jade, cool and luminous. My love, she murmured, why do you look so handsome tonight? Thank you. He smiled at her, calm in the eyes. She smiled back, rising to stand behind his chair, hands braced on the armrests. Lowering her head, she let the tip of her nose brush lightly against his thick, dark hair at the temple. It felt like a moment of quiet intimacy. "Shall I have the staff move your things back into the master bedroom?" He neither nodded nor shook his head, only lifted his glass and clinked it gently against hers. Afterward, they walked through the garden together. The moon was bright, the stars sparse, the lawn carpeted with withered rose petals. He said almost nothing. She followed a few steps behind, a pleasant drowsiness settling in, the scene around them bathed in a tranquil kind of beauty. She couldn't quite remember whether he came to the master bedroom later that night. She only knew she slept deeply and long. When she woke, it was already noon. Rolling over, she reached instinctively for the other side of the bed. "Ethan." Her head throbbed faintly as she pushed herself upright. The bedroom was empty. On the king-sized bed, only one pillow bore the faint imprint of a head. He hadn't slept there that night. And Vivian didn't yet know. It wouldn't just be that night. From that moment on, Ethan would never again set foot in that room. Vivian rose unsteadily, a dazed look in her eyes. She staggered toward the bathroom, but her foot slipped. The fall was brutal, her head struck the edge of the toilet with a sickening thud. A sudden, hot rush spilled down her legs. Blinking through the haze, she saw two dark streams of blood running down her skin, pooling together on the tile into a small, gleaming puddle. The pain in her lower abdomen hit next, sharp and twisting, as if something were being carved out of her from the inside. She lost consciousness. It would be another 20 minutes before the house staff found her. At that moment, I was on my way back from the hospital, bringing Eleanor home. Earlier, I'd told her my decision. She'd understood, even accepted it, though it had left her unsettled. The stress had taken its toll. She'd been hospitalized for days. "I'm here to take you home," I said, stepping up to hold her hand. Her back was stooped now, her legs bent with age, but her grip was still warm, steady, strong enough to send a current of courage through me. "I told the Lancasters from the beginning," she said softly. "The gap between our families is too wide. Your grandmother understood that better than anyone." She sighed. "Now that it's come to this, I don't blame anyone. I only hate to see you hurt." I smiled faintly and pressed my forehead against her shoulder like a boy seeking comfort. "If you really want to take care of me, make me some bacon and eggs. I haven't had your cooking in ages." "From now on, every day," she promised. I steadied her as we walked. The midday sun spilled over us, and for the first time in days, I felt warmth seep into my body. On the way down the hospital steps, I saw an ambulance pulling in. Inside, Vivian lay on a stretcher, her face pale as paper. I let go of Eleanor's hand and walked slowly toward her. Vivian, her voice thin but urgent, gestured for the nurse to stop. "Where were you? Why weren't you with me? If you'd been there, you could have gotten me to the hospital sooner. Now I've lost the baby. Are you happy?" Her face was ashen, edged with a faint, cold blue. Her eyes burned with fury and pain. "Does it hurt?" "Good. It should." My own expression didn't change. "When you're discharged, sign the papers. Let's finalize the divorce." "I'm not divorcing you." Her voice was cold, unwavering. I was mildly surprised, but otherwise unmoved. "Then I'll see you in court, if you want to make a public spectacle of it. To turn what people thought was a love story into something they'll laugh over at dinner." I let out a small, careless laugh. "Then I'll see it through to the end." She started to speak again, but the doctor was already urging the nurse to get her into the operating room. I went straight to see her father, Scott. I didn't hide anything, and I didn't embellish. I simply repeated Adrian's words to me, every single one of them, exactly as he'd said them. Scott had only one daughter. He had never been able to accept Adrian's inability to have children, and years ago, he'd played the role of the villain who split the lovers apart. Over the 3 years of my marriage to Vivian, his attitude toward me had been lukewarm, never warm, but never cruel either. When he'd learned Vivian was pregnant, he'd been overjoyed. But now the baby was gone. I figured, even if Scott hated me, he must hate Adrian more. If Adrian hadn't tried to provoke me by telling me the truth, I might never have come to this point. He wanted to reconcile with Vivian. But after this, he would never succeed. Adrian had been right about one thing. I'm not tolerant. I'm petty. I want the person I love to have room in their heart only for me. And I want the people who hurt me to never know happiness again, because when they were doing the hurting, they never felt compassion or guilt. Scott was a decisive man. Just as he had once forced Adrian to leave, he acted now without hesitation. Vivian and I quickly dissolved our marriage on paper. I walked away with a considerable settlement, not Lancaster family wealth, but more than enough for an ordinary man to live comfortably for 100 years. As for Adrian, under Scott's unrelenting pressure, the Whitmore family cut ties with him entirely, severing his financial lifeline. I heard he even attempted suicide once. Vivian stayed with him in the hospital for a day and a night. Word was, she insisted on marrying him. Scott, furious, slapped her twice and threatened to throw her out. He even swore he'd have another child to inherit the family fortune. But all of that was no longer my concern. I went back with Eleanor to Williford, 1,000 miles away. I renovated her little cottage, and I've decided that come spring, I'll fill the yard with her favorite sunflowers. A month later, Vivian showed up without warning. Eleanor didn't open the door. Vivian waited outside for hours, until nearly dawn, before finally leaving. The next morning, as I stepped out to get milk, I saw her again. Even in the biting chill of early winter, she wore only a thin coat, ever conscious of appearances. I, on the other hand, bundled myself in a heavy down jacket. You see, we had always been from two different worlds. Neighbors paused to stare, curious. In Williford, it wasn't often you saw a woman so polished, so effortlessly elegant. I glanced at her once, then looked away. When I was younger, her beauty had been enough to make me throw caution to the wind. But marriage is like drinking water, you alone know whether it's warm or cold. I had chosen this path myself, and I had accepted it. Vivian said nothing, only followed me. I fetched the milk, bought breakfast, and headed back. She stayed behind me the entire way, until I reached the gate to the yard. Ethan. She finally spoke my name. I didn't stop. I pushed open the gate and was about to close it when she stepped forward, hand braced against the door. Ethan, Adrian's getting married this spring. I couldn't remember the last time I'd truly lost my temper. I'd gone years without even raising my voice. But this time, I acted without thinking. The warm milk splashed across her face. Her expensive coat, her silk scarf, her jewelry, her carefully applied makeup, all ruined. She stared at me, startled, brows knitting. Ethan. If the one marrying him this spring were you, I said evenly, I might still be able to wish you both well. But right now, it doesn't look like you love him all that much. After all you'd have to do is walk away from the Lancaster fortune, and you could be Mrs. Whitmore. And yet, you won't. Ethan was only half right. She truly didn't love Adrian the way she once had, but it wasn't because she couldn't bear to part with the Lancaster wealth. It was because she no longer loved him the way she had when she was young. After finding out she was pregnant, Vivian had considered it, the three of them living together as a family. That shameful impulse she'd once had, she planned to bury forever. That year in Atlanta, when desire and recklessness overtook her, she crossed a line with Adrian. In a moment of weakness, she'd promised him both the child and a future together. But she had regretted it almost immediately. Then Adrian had told Ethan. And the man who had once been the gentlest, most patient soul she knew had walked away from her without hesitation. After the miscarriage, one thought consumed her. She could no longer keep Ethan. Like the petals of a rose, she thought, once they've fallen, they're gone for good. Yet in their villa, Ethan's presence lingered everywhere. The staff often spoke of him without thinking. Mr. Caldwell liked this, Mr. Caldwell always did it that way, if Mr. Caldwell knew. Even she caught herself doing the same. Every evening at 6, she returned home knowing full well he no longer lived there, yet still half expecting him to appear in the doorway to greet her. She had once thought of Ethan as a glass of water kept at a steady 113 degrees, plain, flavorless, something that could be taken or left. But how could a person live without water? She often replayed their last meal together, the way he'd looked with the flush of wine on his face, so handsome under the warm light. Sometimes she imagined that night in the garden differently. If, during their walk, she had reached for his hand. If she had come up behind him, wrapped her arms around his waist. If she had whispered, "Husband," against his back. Would he have softened? Would he have given her another chance? She also wondered, if she hadn't missed him in that downpour, if she had arrived on time, would the ending have been rewritten? But such thoughts had no weight anymore. The past was fixed. She told herself to keep moving forward. Ethan remained single, turning down more than a few women over the years. After all, once upon a time, he had loved her deeply. She still visited him 2 or 3 times a year. But on her 9th visit, the story repeated itself, only the leading woman had changed. That day, the rain fell hard, just like the night she'd failed to pick him up. But this time, the woman in the rain, Alice, had eyes only for Ethan. Through the sheets of water, Vivian saw her car glide to a stop. Ethan stood under the eaves, sheltering from the storm. When Alice stepped out with an umbrella, his face lit with a warmth she remembered all too well, his gaze fixed on her as if the rest of the world didn't exist. She ran toward him, urgency in her steps. When she reached the stairs, Ethan caught her steady, taking the umbrella from her hand. It tilted almost entirely toward the girl beside him, but she kept nudging it back over his head. Back and forth they went, until they were both drenched, yet laughing, radiant in the downpour. Vivian sat in her car, motionless, watching. The wipers swept frantically, but the rain seemed to swallow everything. The car carrying Ethan sped away, vanishing into the curtain of water. And the downpour from years ago, the one when she had left Ethan standing alone, now crashed over her like a waterfall, long delayed but merciless. Vivian gave a bitter little smile. She started her engine, turned the wheel, and drove off, her car an arrow loosed into the dense rain. In a fleeting moment, she thought she saw the Ethan of their younger years. It was back when they had just gotten engaged. Her father had never cared much for her, but her late grandmother had adored Ethan. At the engagement, her grandmother had told him, "Vivian can be strong-willed. If she ever bullies you, come to me, and I'll take your side." So back then, whenever she teased or pushed him too far, he would always reply, "Careful, or I'll tell grandmother on you." The memory made her smile. Then she thought of their wedding night. She had cried from the pain and bitten him hard enough to draw blood. Ethan had gone pale from it, but still held her gently, murmuring comfort. She had even asked, "Why aren't you threatening to tell grandmother now?" What he'd answered, she couldn't quite recall. She only remembered the way he had lowered his head and kissed her, soft lips, tender and deep, until she'd gone quiet and still in his arms. Vivian understood now. She had loved him from the very first time they met, she simply hadn't realized it then. But people are strange that way, they lament the withering of a flower, yet while it blooms, they rarely rejoice in it or cherish it as they should. In the 2nd year after their divorce, the roses Ethan had planted at their marital home withered away. In Williford, though, Eleanor's garden was full of sunflowers in bloom. But those golden faces, open to the sun, no longer belonged to her. Vivian lifted her head suddenly, afraid she might cry. And so, beneath the pounding rain, she stood. Outside the life Ethan had already begun without her.